You know the story of Adam. God creates man from clay, breathes life into him, places him in a garden. That same story appears on Sumerian clay tablets, carved over 1,000 years before Genesis. Same name, the Adamu, same material, clay, same garden. They called it the Eden. Scholars call this cultural borrowing. Case closed. Then a man named Zecharia Sitchin translated those same tablets and said everyone had been reading them wrong. The gods weren't gods. They were a species called the Anunnaki. Clay wasn't clay. It was genetic material. And the Adamu wasn't a beloved creation. It was a genetically engineered worker purpose-built to mine gold for beings from another planet. In 2022, Max Planck geneticists discovered that every living human carries a single gene variant, one amino acid that Neanderthals did not have. It makes our brains produce significantly more neurons in the frontal cortex. One mutation every human on Earth never found in any other species that has ever lived. I'm your host, Magnum, and this is the Swerve Podcast. What is up, everybody? How are you all doing today? I'm excited you've chosen to join me for yet another wild episode. You could have been anywhere in the world, but yet here we are learning about the craziest things that I could possibly find. Today, we are deep diving into one of the most elaborate, strange, and disturbingly detailed conspiracy theories ever constructed, the Anunnaki and its related ancient astronaut hypotheses. We will be closely examining the work of a man named Zecharia Sitchin. Many of you are probably familiar with this person. Many of you have probably heard this before. But for those who are completely unfamiliar, Zecharia Sitchin is a man who claimed the oldest civilization on Earth left us a message, and we've been reading it wrong for centuries. In today's show, we will be attempting to address questions like, why does a creation myth include a sanitation protocol? The oldest human origin story ever found doesn't describe a god lovingly sculpting man from clay. It describes a goddess washing her hands before a procedure, 14 surrogates carrying fetuses to term, and a series of failed prototypes, each cataloged with a specific medical defect before the goddess holds up the first success and announces to an assembly, "My hands have made it." Why does every human alive carry a single gene mutation that no Neanderthal ever had? One that forces the frontal lobe to grow more neurons. And why can't anyone explain how it got there? And why does the oldest flood narrative ever written, over 1,000 years older than Genesis in the Bible, describe not a god punishing the wicked, but a secret vote to exterminate a species, a sworn oath of silence, and one dissenter who kept his oath by whispering a warning to a wall? Well, after today's episode, we might finally have answers to why we obsess over gold, our need to work to feel complete, and our blind submissiveness to powerful elites. Finally, I will attempt to swerve us back into the acceptable Overton window of thought before we crash into infinite cosmic psychosis in today's final thoughts. But if you're a first-time listener and you're wondering what you've stumbled across, welcome to the Swerve Podcast. If you enjoy deep dives on obscure topics, conspiracy theories, and the unexplained, you are in the right place because this is all that I cover here. Every week, I obsess over one fringe topic, researching everything from peer-reviewed papers to unhinged 3 a.m. YouTube robot voice videos. I'll show you what I found, I'll explain the technical stuff, and I'll go deeper than you thought and trust you to decide what's real. This is going to be an interesting show. It is possible that we will cover more in today's show than ancient aliens did in 22 seasons. And that's true. You're going to see when we get into this. You're going to understand this very in depth. You're going to get everything there is condensed down into a great show. Here we go. With all of that said, thank you everyone, as always, for listening today. Let's get into the heart of today's show and swerve into the unknown. The Sumerians built the first civilization on Earth. They invented writing, codified law, mapped the stars, and they were remarkably clear about one thing. None of it was theirs. In their oldest clay tablets, they claim that civilization was a literal package deal, a set of divine blueprints called the May, handed directly to them by beings who descended from the sky. For most of history, mainstream scholars read these texts as colorful religious myth. One man read them as a confession. Part 1, The Gods Before God. Sumer was located in what is now southern Iraq, in the fertile plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This region has been referred to as the cradle of civilization. It is still widely considered by historians and archaeologists to be the oldest civilization in human history. And yes, I can hear some of you. What about Göbekli Tepe? What about Göbekli Tepe? What about Göbekli Tepe? And I agree. Göbekli Tepe is older. It's older by about 6,000 years, actually. But the thing is, it's still not considered a civilization. It's considered the oldest temple. And the reason for this is that there was no permanent housing, no agriculture, no written language, no legal system or codified government. Therefore, Göbekli Tepe is not evidence of a vast civilization, but something else. In any case, the Sumerian civilization emerged around 4,500 BCE and reached its full stride by roughly 3,800 BCE. And the thing that has puzzled historians for over a century is how it emerged. Most civilizations develop gradually. You can trace a slow arc from the nomadic hunting to settled farming to pottery to towns to cities, each stage building on the last over centuries or millennia. Sumer skipped the line. It arrived fully equipped. Cuneiform writing, one of the earliest known writing systems. A base 60 number system we still use every time we read a clock. It had codified law, sophisticated astronomy, organized religion, metallurgy, architecture, agriculture, medicine, music, all at once. No detectable primitive buildup. A historian named A. Parrot, which is actually a hilarious name. Your name's A. Parrot. Let's go. He called it, quote, a flame which blazed up so suddenly, end quote. The mythologist Joseph Campbell described it as well. Listen here.
With stunning abruptness, there appears in this little Sumerian mud garden the whole cultural syndrome that has since constituted the germinal unit of all the high civilizations of the world.
Every major civilization that followed, Babylonian, Assyrian, Hebrew, Greek, it all drew from Sumerian roots. And the Sumerians themselves spoke about where all of the foundations of their civilization came from. They didn't take credit for this. A Sumerian inscription preserved from that era reads the following. Listen here.
Whatever seems beautiful, we made by the grace of the gods.
So who were their gods? Well, their gods were beings that they called the Anunnaki. So who were the Anunnaki in this original ancient Sumerian mythology? Before anyone attached the word alien to them, the Anunnaki is an original ancient mythology. What was this? Well, in mainstream Sumerian scholarship, the Anunnaki was a pantheon of powerful deities, the divine descendants of Anu, the Sky Father. They were gods of creation, cosmic order, and judgment, central to Mesopotamian religious life for thousands of years. At the summit of this hierarchy sat Anu, the supreme sky god, ruler of the heavens. Below him, two powerful suns divided control of earthly affairs. There was Enlil, the god of wind, air, and storms in traditional Sumerian religion. He was the enforcer, the most powerful active deity, the one whose decrees were final. He represented authority and the terrifying power of nature. Then there was Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, magic, and craftsmanship. He was associated with the life-giving waters of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and associated with the spark of creativity and invention. Where Enlil was feared, Enki was clever, compassionate, and beloved. And then there was Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, connected to fertility, healing, and the sustaining of life. There were also the Igigi, a separate group of divine beings appearing in texts from the old Babylonian period onward. In some myths, the Igigi served as a heavenly function. In others, they were a subordinate class who labored on behalf of the Anunnaki before rebelling, as described in the ancient text, the Atra-Hasis epic. This rebellion, according to standard mythological reading, led to the creation of humanity by Enki, who fashioned people from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god to replace the Igigi's labor. To mainstream historians, everything we just said in this opening section is simply symbolic. Enlil personifies devastating storms. Enki represents the rivers that sustain Mesopotamian life. Their battles are mere metaphors for droughts, floods, and the unpredictable forces governing ancient existence. The creation of humans from clay is simply a poetic way to explain our relationship to the divine, a motif found in creation myths worldwide. That is the accepted reading, and it's well supported and it makes sense. And then came along a man who looked at the exact same ancient texts and said, "You're all wrong. The gods were real and they weren't from here." Enter Zecharia Sitchin. He was born in 1920, raised in Palestine, and eventually moved to New York, where he worked as a journalist, editor, and then ultimately became a shipping executive. He was not a trained archaeologist, linguist, or historian. So you might be asking, what is he doing with his hands in this territory? Well, he also had a degree of economics from the University of London. Allegedly, I couldn't find proof of it, but he had an immense passion for the ancient world, and he spent decades teaching himself to read Sumerian cuneiform, visiting archaeological sites, and studying tablets in museums. Based on his extensive research, he became convinced that modern scholars were trapped in the assumption that ancient people could only produce primitive mythology. He believed that they were missing what the texts were actually communicating. In 1976, he published his infamous work, The 12th Planet, and the opening was basically a declaration of war on conventional history. Sitchin said the following:
"We will prove that Earth was indeed visited in its past by astronauts from another planet. We will identify the planet from which these astronauts came."
He followed with,
"We will unravel the secret of their immortality. We will trace the dramatic events that led to the creation of man, and show the advanced methods by which this was accomplished."
Sitchin was not merely speculating. He framed his hypothesis as proof, and what emerged was one of the most enduring alternative histories ever assembled. His core thesis goes something like this: the Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, were real physical beings, not mere symbols, not personified forces of nature, but real flesh and blood organisms, or deities, however you want to talk about it. The Anunnaki were flesh and blood extraterrestrials from a planet called Nibiru, which he claimed orbits the sun at a vast elliptical path taking roughly 3,600 years to complete. In fact, according to Sitchin, Anunnaki means those who from heaven to earth came. The inhabitants of Nibiru, according to Sitchin, were a race of long-lived tall humanoids, and they came to Earth roughly 450,000 years ago for one specific reason. Can you guess what it was? Gold. They came for gold from Nibiru to Earth, seeking gold. There's something deeply hilarious about that. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's pretty funny to me. In any case, their home world's atmosphere was eroding, and their scientists had determined that suspending fine gold particles in the upper atmosphere could shield the planet from harmful radiation. Earth, rich in this precious metal, was now their target. So they had to come here to get the gold. They had to create it into these fine nanoparticles that could remain suspended in their atmosphere naturally. And this would deal with the problem of this radiation they were facing. They were going to be wiped out. They had to do something. They had to find gold. Now, Sitchin's book sold millions of copies in more than 25 different languages. It's an incredibly popular book. Now, Michael Heiser is one of the most prominent academic critics of Sitchin, and he even acknowledged that Sitchin is, quote, arguably the most important proponent of the ancient astronaut hypothesis over the last several decades, end quote. The History Channel's Ancient Aliens was built on Sitchin's framework. They have 22 seasons, folks. 22 seasons of Ancient Aliens. It's still going. And it all comes from this one book. The ideas that he put forth. We're still talking about it. I'm still here talking about it. The 1994 film Stargate drew conceptual inspiration from his ideas. And get this, in 2016, Iraq's Minister of Transport publicly claimed that the Sumerians had built and operated a spaceport 5,000 years ago, and he cited Zecharia Sitchin to support it. He just said this in a speech. This is recent. This is like 10 years ago only. During the speech, there's journalists and colleagues, and they're listening to him, and he veers entirely off script and claims that the site of a new airport that they're building in Iraq was being built exactly where the ancient Sumerians had built a spaceport thousands of years ago. This is a true story. That's what Iraq's Minister of Transport actually said. This is how popular this theory is. Even the politicians are entranced by it. Overall, the entire modern ancient astronaut movement traces back to Sitchin's writings. According to Sitchin, when the Anunnaki arrived on Earth roughly 450,000 years ago, they were led by Enki and established a base called Eridu. Eridu is notably the name of the oldest known Sumerian city. Here, mining operations began, first extracting gold from the waters of the Persian Gulf, then shifting to deep mining in southern Africa as surface deposits thinned. Sitchin pointed to the existence of ancient mining operations in modern-day Zimbabwe and Swaziland, which he claimed date to 50,000 to 100,000 years ago. He used this as physical evidence for this part of the narrative. The Anunnaki, they did not do the digging. For that, according to Sitchin, they brought the Igigi. Remember the subordinate caste that was bound to serve? Well, in Sitchin's timeline, he suggests that the Igigi toiled in Earth's mines for roughly 150,000 years mining gold. They were extracting it and sending it skyward to orbiting platforms, where it was loaded onto transport ships bound for Nibiru. The ancient texts describe their labor as immense and their suffering as profound. And the entire system, in Sitchin's telling, ran on a clock. Nibiru's 3,600-year orbital cycle. Every passage brought new demands from a dying homeworld. The pressure mounted. The conditions in the mines worsened. And somewhere deep underground, patience was running out. What happened next is a labor revolt so vivid it reads like a screenplay, except it isn't a screenplay. It is a 6,000-year-old ancient text, complete with burning tools, a siege, and a desperate assembly of gods facing a crisis that threatened the survival of their entire species. But the solution they came up with wasn't punishment, and it wasn't negotiation. It was something far stranger, something that, if you take it at face value, changes the meaning of what it is to be human. A workforce that had been digging gold for longer than all of human history pushed past its breaking point and besieged the gods. The assembly that followed could have ended in executions. Instead, they voted to engineer a replacement class. The protocol called for the blood of a god, the living matter of the earth, 14 surrogate mothers, and a goddess who washes her hands before the procedure begins. Scholars have called it a creation myth. But why does a creation myth include a sanitation protocol? Part 2, Blood and Clay. Do you remember Enlil, one of the Anunnaki? He's one of the two brothers. He's brother of Enki. Well, he was the supreme commander on Earth, and he was asleep. The workers, the Igigi, had began to surround his compound. This is an exact translated passage from the ancient Atra-Hasis records.
It was night, halfway through the watch. His house was surrounded, but the god Enlil did not know. Calcal then observed it, was disturbed. He slid the bolt and watched. Nusku roused his lord. He got him out of his bed, saying, "My lord, your house is surrounded. Battle has come right up to your gate."
The entire gold operation had halted. The survival of Nibiru hung in the balance. If they were no longer going to mine, if the Igigi had actually revolted, what were they going to do without the gold to protect their atmosphere from the harmful radiation at their home planet? Enlil, true to his character, wanted blood. He wanted to execute the ringleaders and make an example, force them back into work through fear and violence. But before that could happen, an emergency assembly was called. Anu, the sky god, the father of Enlil and Enki, was there. Enlil was there, Enki was there, and Ninhursag was there, and they convened in a manner that reads less like a divine council and more like a corporate crisis session. And then Anu, the king of the gods himself, did something unexpected. He sided with the mutineers. Anu, in the text, the Atrahasis epic, says the following.
"What are we accusing them of? Their work was heavy, their distress was much, every day. The lamentation was heavy, we could hear the complaint."
That's when Enki proposed his solution. Not punishment, not a negotiation, but something no one had considered. The Atrahasis records, in Enki's own words, say the following.
"The womb goddess is present. Let her create a mortal man. so that he may bear the yoke, the work of Elil. Let man bear the load of the gods.
The gods had voted to create a new class of worker, man. Now, if Sitchin is correct, and the Anunnaki were not mythological gods, but extraterrestrial beings, then what is described in those ancient texts, the creation of man, was really just a corporate solution to a labor shortage. You thought corporate corruption was bad in 2026? Well, guess what? Corporate corruption goes way further back than you ever imagined. I can just imagine Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman just taking notes while they're watching Ancient Aliens on the History Channel together over popcorn. Yes, we will genetically engineer a worker class to run the data centers. Yes. But you know what? Anytime you learn anything from Ancient Aliens, that's a win. So I'm going to give them a pass. And that sounds like a knock on Ancient Aliens, and it kind of is passive aggressively. But here's the thing. I also watch Ancient Aliens, and I think it's pretty sick. And I like that guy with the wild hair when he says things. And it's a meme, and I like that meme too. So let's continue. Here is where the story crosses from ancient mythology into something genuinely unsettling. Sitchin believes that these ancient texts read more like laboratory procedure notes than primitive creation myths. The procedure, as Sitchin reconstructed it from multiple overlapping ancient texts, goes something like this. A young, perfect Anunnaki male was selected. His blood, or his essence, the genetic material. The Akkadian word, ti'ima, which Sitchin interpreted as something akin to genetic material, is extracted. Then the clay of the Abzu was prepared. Sitchin argues that that was not literal mud. He noted that the Sumerian word for this clay, tit, can be translated as, quote, that which is with life, end quote, living biological material, not dirt, according to Sitchin. He read it as the genetic material of an existing Earth hominid, Homo erectus. The Sumerian poem called Enki and Ninmah records Enki's instructions.
Mix to a core the clay from the basement of earth just above the Abzu, and shape it into the form of a core. I shall provide good, knowing young gods who will bring that clay to the right condition.
Ninersog carried out the work. She, quote, washed her hands, pinched off clay, mixed it in the step. Sitchin emphasizes the hand-washing line here. Why is there sanitary precautions described in the text over 4,000 years old? Could this really be a description of a surgical procedure? And I will agree, it is kind of strange when you look at it from this new perspective that Sitchin is presenting us. Is it possible that clay is just a misinterpretation? Obviously, ancient Sumerians would not have any knowledge of genetic information. If this is a description of what happened, it would be using words that they knew at the time. Could these be represented in a novel way, knowing what we know now in our modern technological landscape? These are ideas that Sitchin puts forward, and you can see why they are pretty compelling because they hang on ancient texts that are real. They're just being viewed through a different perspective. Now, according to the ancient Atra-Hasis text, Ninhursag prepared 14 portions of the mixture and implanted them into the wombs of 14 Anunnaki females who served as surrogates. After the gestation period, 14 first-generation humans were born. There was 7 males and 7 females. When the first emerged, the text records Ninhursag's words.
I have created. My hands have made it.
She then addressed the assembled gods.
You commanded me a task. I have completed it. I have removed your heavy work. I have imposed your toil on the worker, man. You raised a cry for worker kind. I have loosed the yoke. I have provided your freedom.
And the response of the assembled gods? Quote, they ran together and kissed her feet, end quote. So they were very stoked about this. This creation had worked. They had this new worker class, the Homo sapiens. Is that why we are here? Were we some kind of genetic experimentation by some more advanced being? And this is why we are what we are. Why do we like gold? All of the gold in the world, it's held in central banks. Above that gold, we have our currency systems that were based on it. I mean, we're off of those systems now. We have fiat currencies. But at the end of the day, Central banks are still storing gold and they're still buying gold to stabilize their currencies. Why is the world obsessed with gold? Well, maybe this history can explain that. Why do we all have this deep desire to work? We don't feel complete unless we have our tasks, our work, a job, a vocation per se. Maybe it stems from this genetic engineering in the past. What about how we are all so easily controllable? We are a social species. We did evolve in hierarchies. Maybe it has something to do from an evolutionary perspective, but perhaps also it has something to do with this. Maybe we were created to act as such. These are ideas that Sitchin is putting forward. You can see why this is so interesting to so many people and why Ancient Aliens continues to be on the History Channel. But the triumph didn't come without a cost. Before the successful model, the text described a series of defective creations with a specificity unusual for a myth. There was a being with impaired urinary function, a female incapable of reproduction, a being with no differentiated sex organs, another with diseased eyes, trembling hands, and failing hearts. Another was described as being advanced in years from the moment of its creation. This is something a modern reader might interpret as a premature aging disease, such as progeria, which is a very crazy genetic disorder. Is this what was being described at the time? These are not fantastical monsters. They read like the documented outcomes of a process involving trial and error. Enki is specifically held responsible for the failed iterations, and the text described Ninhursag growing frustrated with his failures before the final successful creation. In any case, the final product, we could say, called Adapa, or Adam, was, in Sitchin's reading, a genuine hybrid. Intelligent enough to understand complex commands, strong enough for hard labor, but deliberately limited. According to Sitchin, the first humans were designed to be sterile, a controlled, non-reproducing workforce. They also lacked the extreme longevity of the Anunnaki. Sitchin noted that the Sumerian terms for this new creature reinforced its purpose. It was Lulu, which he says stands for primitive, a Lulu Amilu, which he says stands for primitive worker, an Owlum, which he also describes as being translated to laborer. As Sitchin wrote,
the very terms by which the Sumerians and Akkadians called man bespoke his status and purpose.
He also pointed out,
the term that is commonly translated as worship was in fact avad, work. Ancient and biblical man did not worship his god, he worked for him.
But then Enki, the scientist, the creator, the god whose symbol was the serpent, did something unauthorized. According to Sitchin's reading, he gave the humans the ability to sexually reproduce, upgrading the prototype without clearance from Enlil. In this interpretation, the forbidden fruit described in Genesis in the Garden of Eden wasn't about moral knowledge. It could have been about reproductive capability. Recall that Enki is also symbolized by the serpent, and the serpent is who deceives Adam and Eve in the garden. The knowledge of good and evil, in this case, from this new perspective, it equals sexual and reproductive knowledge. This was forbidden from man, and when Enlil discovered this unauthorized upgrade, he was furious. The controlled workforce was developing capabilities it was never meant to have. As such, the humans were expelled from what Sitchin interprets as a controlled laboratory zone from Eden and set loose. And you know what? That's a pretty interesting idea. What if all of this is a literal thing and Genesis is just an interpretation or a reiteration of ancient Sumerian texts? And if these ancient Sumerian texts are based on more prosaic meanings, such as the Anunnaki, which Sitchin believes were a real being, this all gets very interesting really fast. Once humanity could reproduce, it did. Massively. And then something Enlil had explicitly forbidden began to happen. The sons of God took the daughters of man as partners. Sitchin identified these offspring as the Nephilim, which he translated not as giants, but as those who came down. Human Anunnaki hybrids, which is interesting because the humans are already Anunnaki hybrids. And now the human females were very attractive, so the Anunnaki start having sex with them. And we get a human Anunnaki hybrid when the humans were already human Anunnaki hybrids. It's fractal, it's fractal, it's fractal, it's fractal, fractal, fractal. Figures like Gilgamesh, the legendary Sumerian king described in the epics as partly divine, fit this model. This is what Sitchin believes is going on. He thinks maybe Gilgamesh was Nephilim. Nephilim are a further human Anunnaki hybrid. This is what he thinks is going on. What do you think is going on, folks? Stick with me because we're going to put it all back together. But if you want even more crazy ancient mystery stuff, I just did a deep dive on stargates and how ancient hieroglyphs and artifacts may indicate that the ancients knew how to access wormholes and transform into plasma-based entities that can traverse the cosmos. Here is the trailer.
4,000 years ago, they left instructions.
This shape on the ceiling, that's a wormhole.
The same symbol carved across civilizations that never met. The king becomes a flash of lightning.
Pull the components out of the ark, the rod, the tablets, assemble them. It's a Tesla coil.
You're describing a machine that turns a man into lightning?
I'm describing what's on the wall.
The Stargate was never lost. It was never a machine.
It's you.
Ancient Stargates. Listen in the Producer Vault on Patreon today. We're waiting for you.
As human populations grew, Enlil reached his breaking point. And then according to Sitchin, nature handed him exactly the opportunity he needed. Nibiru's orbit was due for another close pass through the inner solar system roughly 13,000 years ago to present day. It was going on that long arc and it would be coming close to Earth. Sitchin argued that the gravitational pull of a planet-sized body passing near Earth would destabilize the Antarctic ice sheet, a massive shelf of ice that had been building for millennia. The resulting displacement would trigger a global wave of catastrophic proportions. Enlil made his decision. Simply let it happen. Let the species he had never wanted drown. He bound the Anunnaki to an oath of secrecy. No one would warn the humans. But Enki, the creator, he found a loophole. He did not want the humans to perish, like Enlil did. He did not speak directly to a human. Instead, he addressed the wall of a house, whom he knew someone was on the other side listening. This is what he said.
Wall, listen to me. Read, wall. Pay attention to my words. Tear down your house, build a boat.
On the other side was a wise man. His name, Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim heard every word. Enki had also cleverly not broken the oath. He was merely speaking to a wall. Who was he to know who was on the other side hearing the warning? The flood did come. The Anunnaki retreated to orbiting spacecraft and watched the destruction below. According to Sitchin, the Atra-Hasis epic records the goddess's anguish, the same goddess who had held up the first human in triumph.
How could I bespeak evil in the assembly of the gods, order battle for the destruction of my people? It is I who give birth. These are my people.
When the floodwaters finally receded and the survivor made his offering on the mountaintop, the Epic of Gilgamesh gives us one of the most haunting images in ancient literature. The exhausted gods descended down and, quote, collected like flies over a sacrifice. The thing is, every human was dead except Utnapishtim. There was no sacrifices to the gods occurring anymore, so they were starving. Hence, when Utnapishtim, the one who survived on the boat on top of this mountaintop, when he made a sacrifice, they swarmed in. When Enlil arrived, this is what the Gilgamesh text records.
Where did a living being escape? No man was to survive the annihilation.
Enki stepped forward and challenged him.
It is yours, O valiant one, who is the sage of the gods. How? How could you bring about a flood without consideration?
In the Sumerian telling, this isn't a story about divine wrath. According to Sitchin's reading, it's a story about a political conspiracy to commit genocide, and the one god who committed insubordination to stop it. So what we have overall, folks, is a rebellion. a genetic experiment, a forbidden upgrade, a global flood. It's quite an extraordinary narrative, and it ties into many things that we thought we knew, but we now see it from a new perspective. But outside of Sitchin's interpretations of ancient texts, here's the question I have now. Are there any pieces of evidence in modern times that could corroborate his hypothesis? Well, here's the thing. Modern science keeps making discoveries that land uncomfortably close to what Sitchin described. And every time one of these findings hits the news, this 50-year-old theory is resuscitated back to life. That's where we're going next. And this is where it gets really strange. Here's what should happen with a theory the academic world has unanimously rejected. It should get quieter over time. Sitchin's hasn't. Every few years, a peer-reviewed paper from a world-class institution lands on something that rhymes with a claim he made in 1976. And each time, the coincidence gets a little harder to shrug off. Part 3, the evidence. If you're enjoying the podcast, can I ask you to do me a solid and share this with someone you know? Thank you so much. Back to the show. For 4 decades, Sitchin's claims of a hidden planet on a vast elliptical orbit was treated as the most dismissible part of his theory. No massive planet could orbit the sun every 3,600 years without being detected, astronomers said. The gravitational effects alone would disrupt the inner solar system. The idea was considered absurd. Then Caltech astrophysicists Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown published their analysis. They had been studying several small icy objects in the Kuiper Belt, the distant ring of debris far beyond Neptune, and they noticed something peculiar. The objects' orbits were aligned in a way that could only be explained by the gravitational pull of something massive, something invisible to us. Their conclusion was that a planet roughly the size of Neptune was hiding in the outer solar system, traveling on a long, guess what, elliptical path. They designated the name of this Planet 9, which some interpret as Planet 10 because Pluto was the 9th planet and then it went away, so this would make this one Planet 9. But if Pluto is still a planet, then it's Planet 10 or Planet X. Maybe you've come across that before. But the thing is, Planet 9 has never been directly observed. The object would be extremely faint and slow-moving. But the mathematical case was considered strong. The Vera C. Rubin Observatory in Chile, equipped with what is described as the largest digital camera ever constructed, is expected to conduct the kind of deep sky survey capable of detecting it. So what am I saying here? Is this planet Nibiru that Sitchin was describing all of these years ago? Well, not quite. There are critical differences. Planet 9's estimated orbital period is between 10,000 to 20,000 years, not 3,600, and its projected path keeps it so far from the inner solar system that it could never cause this catastrophic flyby that Sitchin was describing. There are significant gaps. But here's the thing. The core concept, a massive undiscovered planet on an elliptical orbit hiding beyond the known planets, this went from being a laughable, absurd subject to an active, legitimate science investigation. And for followers of this ancient astronaut theory, or Sitchin's work, that transition matters enormously. But the discovery that really was the most interesting piece of research that I came across putting together today's show, it wasn't anything discovered in space. It was in our DNA. In September 2022, a research team at the Max Planck Institute, co-led by Svante Pääbo, the Nobel Prize-winning researcher known for sequencing the Neanderthal genome, published a paper in the journal Science that may be among one of the most important findings in human evolutionary biology in recent years. Now, I want to make a note for you all listening here. Svante is actually pretty epic when it comes to sequencing genomes, biological work, molecular biology. His team discovered the Denisovans in 2010. This is another distant cousin of us, Homo sapiens, like the Neanderthals, but different. And this was completely unknown until his team made that discovery just 16 years ago. Here's the other thing. They decoded the entire Neanderthal genome, and this is actually what he won the Nobel Prize for. So he's doing a lot of great work. So what I'm about to tell you next This is some pretty serious scientific discovery. This is published in the journal Science, which is not the most imaginative name for a science journal, but it really is one of the top journals. And this is where what I'm about to talk to next was published in. Here's another fun note where we're on Svante. His father also won a Nobel Prize in 1982? Like, damn, both of them? Right? Like father, like son. Maybe there is some Anunnaki in there. How are you guys both getting Nobel Prizes? That's crazy. But let's get back to the results of this published paper. The starting point was a puzzle. Neanderthal brains were roughly the same size as our brains, at least similar cranial volume, similar overall dimensions. For years, that led scientists to assume equivalent cognitive hardware. But this paper asked a more poignant question. What if you could pack more neurons into the same space? What if brain size, cranial dimensions, wasn't the whole story here? The gene at the center of the finding is called TKTL1. This stands for transketolase-like 1. This is just the name of the gene, TKTL1. Now, every modern human on the planet carries a version of this gene that differs from the version found in Neanderthals, as well as Denisovans, and all other primates by a single amino acid substitution. What am I talking about here? Well, at one specific position in the protein, the gene TKTL1 will be expressed as a protein. At a specific position in that protein, archaic humans and other hominids and other primates, they all carry a lysine residue. However, modern humans carry an arginine residue. There's just one molecular change, that's all. So to put this another way, the TKTL1 protein, it's a chain of 540 amino acids. So another way to think about this is think of this protein as a sentence, and it's made up of 540 words. Well, the difference between the modern human version and the Neanderthal version is just one single word in that 540 word sentence. Specifically, at position 261, Neanderthals, as well as all other apes, they have a lysine, which is one of the 20 amino acids that it could be. But we have an arginine, which is a different one of 20 amino acids. So on paper, it's a very, very small difference. It's just one change. But as we will see, small difference on paper, big difference in outcomes, huge difference in outcomes. Here's why that matters. During brain development, two types of progenitor cells build neurons. Progenitor cells, you can think of them as being stem-like. They're kind of like stem cells. They're not differentiated, so they can become different things. Well, one type of progenitor cell works a single shift. It divides once. It produces two neurons, and then it's done. It's completely gone. But there's another type called basal radial glia. And stick with me here. This explanation is going to blow your mind once we get through it. This type of cell operates completely differently. Each time a basal radial glial cell divides, it doesn't just produce two neurons and is done. It produces one neuron and then a fresh copy of itself that can continue to divide. So one version, you get two neurons and it's done. The basal radial glia, it's not like that. It produces a neuron and then a copy of itself. So you have one neuron and then a copy, and then it divides again. So you have another neuron and a copy, divides again. You have another neuron, a copy. Do you see what I'm saying? So it keeps producing more and more neurons, and the copy of itself is able to continue to divide. It's like a factory. It can rebuild itself after every production cycle, generating neurons round after round for a much longer period of time. Now, what the modern human TKTL1 gene does, well, the human version, it selectively boosts that population of these self-renewing basal radial glial cell factories. The Neanderthal version, well, the gene can't do this. Isn't that interesting? That one change, it made the human gene produce a protein that enables this specific cell type to continue to divide and populate more and more neurons. Well, the question is, how is the human version of TKTL doing this? Well, they actually found an answer to that. The mechanism is metabolic. The human variant drives increased fatty acid production. This process supplies the raw material basal radial cells need to build the cellular extensions required for the self-renewal. The thing is, when the cells are dividing, the new cells, they need cell membranes. And what are cell membranes? They're fats, they're lipids. So without those lipids, the factory cells, these basal radial glial cells that we're talking about, they wouldn't be able to sustain themselves. They need more membrane so that when they divide, there's enough membrane for both the cells. And the human version of this gene, it increases fatty acid production. So you get more of those materials that you need on the division so they can continue to divide. The human TKTL1 gene produces more of which is needed for the cell membrane of the newly divided cells. So our basal radial glial cells can keep dividing and they can keep concentrating neurons, whereas the Neanderthals can't. They don't have the raw materials necessary to continue this division. And the effect concentrates in one specific region of the brain. Get this, the frontal lobe. This is the part of the brain responsible for planning, decision-making, abstract reasoning, and complex social behavior. The frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, it's super important. The paper's conclusions state explicitly that because of this single amino acid substitution, the frontal lobe of modern humans likely contains more neurons than the frontal lobe of Neanderthals. Despite having a near identical overall cranium size, which you would expect to have a similar brain size, our frontal lobe has much more neurons than Neanderthals. At least that's what this paper suggests. Now, why am I going through all of this? Well, here's the swerve. Consider Sitchin's genetic engineering hypothesis. If he is right, well, could this specific amino acid change, which is specific to Homo sapiens, some of our closest cousins, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, they don't have it. Other primates, our other closest cousins, they don't have it. Could this be a specific targeted alteration and upgrading to our cognitive hardware, present in every living human, absent from every archaic cousin? Pretty interesting. Does this blow your mind? Obviously, this is just speculation, but from the lens of Sitchin's work, the parallels, we could say at least, they're pretty fun to think about. You got to admit that, folks. What do you think about this? Let's put this more bluntly. Did the Anunnaki change the genetics to cause this single amino acid change that allowed humans to produce more neurons in the frontal cortex? And that's why we became so advanced. Pretty interesting question. You be the judge. So what else is there out there? We talked about a couple things. What else? Well, there's physical evidence that ancient astronaut theorists invoke quite often. The elongated skulls. On the Paracas Peninsula in southern Peru, archaeologist Julio Tello made a startling discovery in the late 1920s. He unearthed an extensive burial ground containing over 300 skulls, roughly 3,000 years old. The cranial shape was dramatically and unusually elongated. Nothing quite like them had been documented before at this scale. Why was there so many? Why does the skull appear so strange? Why is it elongated? Are we looking at humans or are we looking at something different? That's the idea here. The mainstream explanation is well established and thoroughly documented. For the mainstream, this is simply a practice called artificial cranial deformation or head binding. And across many ancient cultures, including the Huns of Central Asia, the Maya of Mesoamerica, and certain Germanic and Polynesian groups, infant skulls were actually deliberately reshaped by applying sustained pressure through cloth wrappings or wooden boards during the first months of life, when the skull bones are still malleable. It was typically done as a marker of social status, priestly class, or group identity. And that explanation accounts for the vast majority of elongated skulls found worldwide. However, fringe researchers, most notably Brian Forrester and the late L.A. Marzulli, have argued that certain Paracas specimens display features head binding alone allegedly cannot produce. Their claims go something like this. that some skulls show cranial volume significantly exceeding normal human range, that some weigh substantially more than typical skulls, suggesting different bone density, and most provocatively, that some appear to lack the sagittal suture, the fibrous joint running along the top of the skull, presenting instead what looks like a single parietal plate rather than the standard two. So what's going on with all of that? Well, in 2014, Forrester announced preliminary DNA results from several Paracas skulls, claiming that mitochondrial DNA analysis revealed mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known to date, and that subsequent testing allegedly identified genetic markers associated with Mesopotamia and the Middle East. Now, if all of this is true, that would provide some corroborating evidence to the Sitchin story to an extent. But here's the thing. It's important to note these results were never published in any peer-reviewed scientific journal. The methodology has not been made public, and the chain of custody for the samples is unclear. And the risk of contaminating ancient DNA with DNA from the present is extremely high, and the wider scientific community does not accept these claims. But the claims exist, and they add another unresolved thread to a debate that already has many. So, we have a planet that mainstream astronomers now take seriously as a hypothesis. We also have a gene that rewired the human brain through a single amino acid change. Then we have skulls that fringe researchers claim don't fit the standard model. Each of these has a conventional scientific explanation. None requires invoking extraterrestrials, but taken together, filtered through the lens of a theory built on the oldest written texts on Earth, the pattern becomes something that at least makes you think twice. You kind of do a double take. Like, what? What was that? Interesting. Now's the perfect time to join me in today's final thoughts. All right, the elephant in the room. Zecharia Sitchin, obviously, he's not a trained Sumeriologist or a linguist or an archaeologist or an astrophysicist. He was a shipping executive with a reported economics degree who taught himself cuneiform and spent decades writing his theories. Now, that takes a little bit away from his authority, but the thing is, you can have fringe people learn things to the same level that academia would get you to. So for me, that argument of he lacks authority has never been a good one. I always despise arguments from a point of authority because there is no logical foundation for that. You can be an authority and be completely wrong. This has happened many, many, many times throughout human history and our accumulation of knowledge, where you're an authority, you know everything, but you're still completely wrong. We used to think the Earth was the center of the solar system. That's a dated example, but these things happen all the time in science. So for me, that's never a good argument to destroy someone else's argument. But here's the thing. There's a lot of holes. Mainstream cuneiform scholars, the people who read Sumerian and Akkadian for a living, they're pretty unanimous on this. Sitchin's translations are fundamentally flawed. And the thing is, in the age of AI, where we can read these texts using AI and find it extremely quickly online, you can verify these things yourself, which I'll get into in a moment, because I did do this myself. But firstly, Anunnaki. Sitchin claims this means those who from heaven to earth came. Also in Ancient Aliens, they say this is the case as well. But the thing is, Anunnaki never meant that. Its real translation is princely offspring or seed of Anu. Remember, Anu is the sky god who those two brothers are born from, Enlil and Enki. Now, the word Nibiru, it also appears in Babylonian astronomical texts, but it doesn't refer to a hidden planet. It means crossing point or ferry, and it's often associated with Jupiter or the equinox. So, two of the main words that are used in the narrative Sitchin constructs are already wrong. So, if the main ones are wrong, do you think some of the other ones could potentially be wrong? Well, let's think about it. Let's talk about it as we go here. I want to talk about something else. I didn't cover this in any of the main sections, but there's a cylinder seal called VA243, and this is really Sitchin's centerpiece of physical evidence for his entire hypothesis. And the reason being The central symbol on VA 243, Sitchin claimed was the sun surrounded by 11 orbiting bodies. And it does look like that when you look at it. There's a sun-like bigger object in the middle, and then there's other things around it. Now, Sitchin says this is the solar system. And actually, this is why his book is called The 12th Planet. This is also the foundation for the entire Nibiru theory. Sitchin asserts that the image is depicting the sun at the center, being orbited by the 9 known planets, the moon, and finally Nibiru. So in total, that's 12 celestial objects. You have the sun, the 9 known planets, the moon would be 10, and then Nibiru would be 11, and the sun is also considered a planet at the time, so 12 total. The 12th planet would be Nibiru. The thing is, though, that central object, it's not the sun at all. In hundreds of examples of Sumero-Mesopotamian art, the sun is consistently depicted with wavy lines that radiate outwards. The 6-pointed symbol on VA 243 matches the artistic convention that was used for a star in this era. Now, in modern times, we understand that the sun is a star. At this time, this is not what the conventional understanding was. So there was ways for depicting stars, and there was ways for depicting the sun specifically. And this is a star, not the sun depiction. So it's not a diagram of the solar system. And the other thing too, they only knew of 5 planetary bodies at the time. So we had 9 for some time. I believe when Sitchin wrote this book, Pluto was still a part of it. Now it's not. But at the time, there was 9, and he was saying there's 9. But in all the writing, there's only an indication that the ancient Sumerians knew of 5. So even that doesn't line up with what he's saying. And then the other thing, the orbital mechanics just wouldn't work. A planet on Nibiru's proposed 360-year elliptical orbit, at least according to things that I was reading, would be ejected from the solar system or captured into a shorter orbit within a handful of passages. So the physics also don't support the stability of what he's saying over thousands of revolutions. This thing would be captured. It wouldn't have this orbit that he's proposing. Now, Planet 9 from Caltech, this is a legitimate scientific hypothesis that is backed by mathematics, and it is taken seriously. But the thing is, its proposed orbit of 10,000 to 20,000 years doesn't line up with the 3,600 years that Sitchin proposed. It also never approaches the inner solar system, like Sitchin says that that Nibiru should. So it really only bears a surface level resemblance to Nibiru in that it is a hidden planet that we weren't aware of. But it's not the same claim at all. So although it's a cool finding, how much does it corroborate the story? At least for me, not very much at all at this point in time. Now, I also caught a lot of weird things myself just doing basic research into the translations. And it's very simple with AI now to compare translations of these ancient texts. And Zecharia gets a lot wrong when you just do basic things to check his work. So I'll give you some examples here. The creation story, the part that reads like a lab procedure, the hand washing, the clay mixing, which was actually a genetic engineering protocol. Well, Sitchin is actually pulling from at least 2 completely different texts to form that narrative. So the part about forming a man from clay comes from a Sumerian poem called Enki and Ninmah. And then the hand washing detail is not even a part of that. It comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh itself. So Sitchin is stitching some of these tales together into a single seamless narrative to try force the operation room procedure idea. But in the originals, they're separate stories. They're from different periods of time, although I guess somewhat contemporary, but they have different contexts. So he's splicing things, and that's just a small detail that I found, just double checking things quick. And then that hand washing detail, it is pretty interesting, right? You're like, why would they be washing their hands? Like, that does kind of sound lab-like. It does seem kind of modern and clinical. But the thing is, if you just step back and think about it a little longer, well, they're talking about clay, and clay is used in pottery. Now, what do you do when you're engaged in pottery? Well, you would wash your hands first before working with the fine clay. It doesn't require a genetics lab to explain it at all. You can actually explain it with the knowledge and the context and the culture they had at the time. Now, here's another example. Sitchin replaces words like man with the worker man using capital T and capital W for the worker man. He replaces the word mankind with worker kind. So basically, he's arbitrarily inserting subordinate framing directly into the translations when they don't exist in the original translations. The original text just says man, it just says mankind. There's no worker designation. Worker kind is his own creation. The worker man is his own creation. Then he says Lulu, he tells you it means primitive. Well, it doesn't. Lulu is actually an Akkadian word. It's not even Sumerian, and it simply means human being or mortal. He also says Lulu Amilu translates to primitive worker, and that's actually a mashup of two Akkadian words that both just mean human. So if an ancient scribe wrote Lulu Amilu, they'd be saying human man, not worker, and not primitive worker or primitive, nothing like that. So he just totally got that wrong. And then earlier I also mentioned the word Awalam, which Sitchin tells you means laborer. And this one's actually like one of the worst translations, because in Babylonian law, the Code of Hammurabi, this word refers to the highest class of the society, the aristocrats, the nobles, the freeborn property owners. It's the exact opposite of what a lower class slave laborer would be. So he just got that one completely wrong. It does seem to me, just on basic double checking his work, that he's ad-libbing the translations to fit the narrative. And these are just the ones that I happen to look at. I have to imagine most of the translations have this kind of shading running through them. Now, we could go on and on about this. There are academics who have wrote really good white papers. I have some of them linked if you want to read further into them, but we don't even need to go into all of these things. I think you can just deduce a priori problems with this theory. Now, let me give you one of the main ones that I was thinking about when I took a step back from the narrative. Well, if the Anunnaki are advanced enough to travel between planets, even organize spaceships to carry gold and move these through the solar system, distant solar system, the outer areas even, Nibiru, it's very, very far away. And they were also advanced enough molecularly and genetically, their knowledge in those areas, to engineer a completely new species from scratch. Why did they need biological slaves to dig? We're in 2026 and we have autonomous mining equipment. We have surgical robots. We have machines that can learn. But a civilization supposedly millions of years ahead of us couldn't automate a mine? To me, that doesn't make any sense. Why did they need to invent an entire species, us, to swing a pickaxe? It doesn't make any sense. You have interplanetary space travel. You can genetically engineer beings, and you can't make a robot to do your work? Like, what are we talking about here? It doesn't make any sense. So even from the framing of the narrative itself, I find logical inconsistencies. What do you guys think about that? Am I off base here? Am I off base? Am I missing something? There's 22 seasons of Ancient Aliens. I might be missing something here. But what I want to leave you guys with, I think none of this changes the real question that's underneath all of this. The question Sitchin was trying to answer, the same question the Sumerians were trying to answer 4,000 years before him. The question every civilization that has ever existed has tried to answer. Where did we come from? For me, the ancient alien hypothesis is a manifestation of our deep curiosity to know where we came from. Curiosity is deeply a part of our nature. That's just how it is. When you look at it from a Darwinian perspective, well, curiosity is propelling us to seek knowledge because this knowledge increases our potential to survive and reproduce. Curiosity allows us to discover that the grass is greener on the other side. We would never know if we did not have this tendency. In a prosaic manner, satisfying our curiosities can reveal that crossing a river or going over a mountaintop, there's more resources on the other side than where you were before. We wouldn't do these things if it wasn't for our curiosity. Curiosity facilitates these wins. Hence, it became a part of our nature because it was selected for. Now, why did I just say all of that? Well, in the same way curiosity allows us a greater chance at survival and reproduction, that's why it was selected for in our nature. That's why we possess it. It also propels us to ask deeper questions. We wonder, we are here, but from where and why? Our curiosity propels us to also ask deeper questions. The ancient astronaut hypothesis provides a compelling answer to these questions in a way that also matches our modern technological environment. We find ourselves at a time where there's rockets, spacesuits, space helmets, space travel. This is all real for us in this era. Now, if we couple this with ongoing UAP debacles, we are living in an era primed for receiving a story like Sitchin's. We superimpose this theory onto the past, and it makes us wonder, wait, are we really looking at these old texts and images correctly? What if we look at it from this technological perspective, right? Additionally, we are also storytelling machines. We can sit and binge stories for 12 hours straight. Just think about it. When you sit down to watch a 3-hour movie, what are you doing? You're just watching a story. We're transfixed by stories. Stories grip our attention. You can sit and binge Netflix literally 12 hours straight. People do it all the time. Why are you doing that? Well, it's a part of us. We love stories. So what I'm getting at with this, the narrative weight of the ancient astronaut theory and how it hangs on real ancient artifacts and texts, it boosts the brain hacking power of Sitchin's hypothesis. His thesis is literally encoded in a story format. It is a story with heroes and villains, rebellions and creation, betrayal and survival. It's gripping. It's a story so important that the Sumerians themselves carved it and preserved it for millennia. So what I'm saying is, it's not simply our curiosity that is priming us to look for these deeper answers, but our fascination with stories priming us to also receive them. There's a push and a pull. This is also why Ancient Aliens has lasted for 22 seasons and also fundamentally changed the trajectory of the History Channel forever. How was it able to do that? Because this theory works. It's great. It's sticky. This is why it lasted. That's why it left a footprint on our culture for decades and shows no sign of fading. Our nature and our moment in history primed us perfectly for a theory exactly like this. But here's what I want to leave you with. And this is just me. This is just my take. I think the Anunnaki theory we went through today is best understood not as proof of something, but as an exercise in thinking about where we came from, in sitting with that question, in letting ourselves wonder without needing an answer. Because the wondering is the point. Curiosity is the point. Every culture that has ever existed has tried to answer the question, where did we come from? The Sumerians answered it with the Anunnaki. The Hebrews answered it with Genesis. The Greeks answered it with Prometheus and clay. Science answers it with evolution, a long process of mutation and selection stretching back billions of years. And Sitchin answered it with a theory that said, we were made. But wherever you believe we came from, this mere thought is what's important. Because if we stop asking where we came from, we might just stop going anywhere. What's up, folks? I hope you liked today's show, and I hope you learned something cool. Let me know what you thought about all of this. How much merit do you put into the Anunnaki thing? Is it a little bit? Is it a lot? Is there bits and pieces you like? Do you agree with what my take was? Let me know. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts on the things that I'm putting out there. And if you like the podcast, you should follow the show. And if you really like the podcast, there's a link to Patreon in the description. Now, on that note, shout out to our newest members and upgrades on Patreon. Welcome to Molly, Lolo, Auntie Heidenin, Skier Dan, Gerald Davis, IRTP, and Chris Hinselman. Thank you all a ton for helping me make this thing happen. And did you guys know this? Let me give you the numbers real quick. I put out 2 episodes a month to the public, but I make much more than that. Every month, 2 full episodes, the same length, the same depth, the same effort. They go exclusively to Patreon. You will never hear them in the public feeds. One of those episodes doesn't even go to the normal Patreon archive. It stays in the producer vault permanently. On top of that, there are a ton of episodes sitting on Patreon right now that have never touched the public feed. 2 bonus episodes per month, the file room archive and the producer vault, your name in the credits of every main episode, early access and no ads. If you're fine with the public feed, I totally respect that. But if you want the full experience, the link is in the description. Reminder, I just covered how ancient civilizations may have known how to access wormholes wormholes and transform into plasma beings and traverse the cosmos. I go very deep on ancient stargates, and this one was a wild ride. I hope to see you there. Now, thanks again to everyone for listening today. I will see you in the next one. May good karma and vibes be with you all.
Your name in dust on a cracked stone face under dead desert sun. It felt like a trace. My bones know the old fear. My mouth knows the plea. If they made us from clay, what did they make me? Tell me who held the knife. Tell me who drew the line in the blood and the ash. Was the first light mine? Anunnaki, unlock me. Anunnaki, unlock me. I want the name of the hands that shake. Unlock me, Anunnaki, unlock me. If I was born from the stars, why do I bleed like this? I hear it in the wells, in the static of sleep. A sky full of watchers too old to keep. Gold on their fingers, fire in their eyes. Were we made to kneel or made to rise? Tell me who stole the sky. Tell me who fed the dust. If they breathed us alive, why leave us to rust? Anunnaki, unlock me. Anunnaki, unlock me. I want the name of the hands that shape me. Anunnaki, unlock me. Anunnaki, unlock me. If I was born from the stars, why do I bleed like this? I do not need a lie wrapped up in gold. I need the first door, I need the hole. Show me the mountain, show me the flame, show me the reason we wear this name. Anunnaki, unlock me. Anunnaki, unlock me. I want the name of the hands that shape me. Anunnaki, unlock me. Anunnaki, unlock me. If I was born from the stars, why do I bleed like Anunnaki? Anunnaki, I want the truth, even if it scars me.
I would like to give massive props and credits to the producer tier on Patreon. Thank you to Satan Loves You, Dana, David Cheesem, Jorge de Guzman, Shelly Terry, The Mossman, Batcat Meatloaf, Riley, Velcro Shoe Guy, Corpse Candles, Tosh Collins and the Future Anglers of Indian Lake, Ohio, Sean D, Michael Gould, Raekwon, Jackson Danger, Jordan McCormick, Mika Sasita, Michael P, Olmec Willis, Chuck Bricks, Miranda Mercury, Joseph Rivera, That Girl from Quebec, Vox Scan for Life, Dave Natel, Aaliyah, Mark Rowland, Joshua Sindo, Yesterday's Jelly, Danny Harlan, Gandalf the Grizzled, Finton Walsh, Sweet_K Chaos, Cheronomicon, Jesse Gibson, Adam Palafox, Ryan Muller, Jesse South, Jasmine Shook, JR Nunes, Sunny Biscuits, Kaiser Souza, Linda Beasley, Thomas Simone, Chevy, Kristen Castle, AKS 181, Mira S, Lady Hobbit, Kenny Larks, Baldwiener, Colt Farr, Daniel, Katazina Zacida, Dono Yankee, Laurel, Juan Rodriguez, Sam, Chris Henselman, Benjamin Clark, Tank Odom, Chip, Rene Schlinsog, Jar Jar 13131, Trouser _Mouse, Ryan P, K, Moon Puppy, Krisha X, Calamity, Beck Roberts, Kristen W, Rachel Yangle, Lolo, Stevie Mac, Kitty Cat, Nico, Michael Fisher, DR Buck, Carrie Kimberly, Spiritually Canadian, Jason Nichols, Johnny Horsecouch, Darrell Davis, and Auntie Hidden for enabling today's episode and the continued growth of the show. Also, epic thank you to Chevy for being an amplifier of the show on Patreon, and David Cheesem for making his own damn tier. All the outro music for every episode is available for free to download at patreon.com/theswervepodcast. Just find the link in the description and navigate to the music tab. And while you're there, you might as well sign up for topic voting. It's free and it helps me decide what other whacked out crazy shit I should cover next.